In today's special episode of Countryfile, we're looking for the country in the city, taking you on a journey through London from the centre to the suburbs to uncover a myriad of projects that are bringing the benefits of nature closer to our front doors.
Since the GLA introduced its celebrated Space and Health Department at the 2026 UN Climate Change Conference, the city has been paving the way towards a complex and mutual relationship between nature and the city's citizens, buildings, infrastructures, and institutions.
Not only will we be visiting London, we'll also be going to the countryside. Starting off in South London in the boroughs of Southwark and Lambeth, we then hop north over the river to the boroughs of Camden and Enfield, then out of the Big Smoke to the Suffolk coast, over to our reporters on the field.
We start our trip in Southwark, South London, at a spot as popular to football fans as it is to birdwatchers. Today I'm exploring Greendale Fields on my home patch of Southwark. Just a stone's throw from Camberwell, this is a place where birds, bugs and bats live alongside a thriving habitat of sport and recreation. Today I'm meeting with council architect Bertie McPherson, who has a long relationship to this patch of social and natural ecology. Hi Bertie, so what's so special about Greendale? And what's the relationship to the football club? Well, it all started, Bill, with the real estate crash of 2021 actually, because the council bought the pitch off the commercial developer, and it was jointly owned then by the council and the sort of community of fans. This brought the pitch into the wider remit of the sort of Greendale Fields, and it let us really experiment with like what is an accessible green space. Wonderful. But as an architect, where do you come in? Well, Bill, I'm part of a team with the council, including the ecologists, the engineers. We have lots of sites where we're sort of in this joint ownership with other communities. And in Greendale, people really wanted to explore like how to make the most out of this connection with the football club and the AstroTurf. The AstroTurf is very informal, you know, anyone can come on here. The football club, that's different. So the latest sort of project has been the pavilion. It's a small sports pavilion. As you can see, it's made out of reused material, very simply jointed, solid timber, and it's sort of on stilts, dug into the ground. That's how we designed it, and that's because, you know, it's designed to be temporary, to maybe move in a few years. You see, Greendale is getting more and more popular, and the football clubs, the fans are skyrocketing. So in the future, you know, we might need something a bit bigger. We might need something more ambitious for the local community here, and the football field might need a bigger stadium. So this might go one day, but we'll replace it with something even better. Well, wasn't that lovely chatting to Bertie McPherson? We're now going on a short walk to Brixton, where Vicky is looking at another project that's turned tarmac into terra verde.
The conversations and discussions surrounding mental health became even more prevalent in the years during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. The disparity in access to green space is even more acute in cities. The feeling of escape that people were able to experience during their daily exercise made people appreciate and explore their local surroundings. The interest in exploring the local did not waver once restrictions had been lifted. The 2030 ban of all petrol and diesel vehicles in London created exciting opportunities for spaces that existed because of cars. Among the numerous other uses that these green spaces had potential for, the allocation, creation and integration of green spaces was also on the agenda. Today we are in Brixton at a test site for a new green space facilitated by the removal of cars from our roads. The smaller car park behind you was left open as the transition to fewer cars was still underway. But once the car park was closed, various community engagement events were held and hosted here, including places to grow, places to sit and socialise, and also places where workshops would take place. In the brief of the project, the seasonal transformation was always kept in mind, so the site could be used throughout the year. Lambeth have identified other sites that could benefit from similar schemes, especially towards the north of the borough, where there are fewer green spaces per population. Once completed, these spaces will contribute to creating more accessible green spaces and help mitigate the effects of new developments. We now visit Eleanor in Somerstown, where the community has celebrated the reduction of cars in a very unique way.
In 1931, Father Basil Jellicoe, a housing reformer, burnt effigies of vermin such as rats, bedbugs and fleas in a performance celebrating the slum clearances of Somerstown. This dramatic celebration heralded the beginning of the end of an era of condemned slum housing in Somerstown. No longer was it the norm to be unhealthily living in damp, rotten conditions with vermin and bugs as part of daily life. The slums that exist in Somerstown were emblematic of a wider problem in London, stemming from the Victorian era, where access to light, clean water, sanitation and space was not a priority for health. It took until the 1960s in London for housing to be condemned by actually going into the buildings themselves to observe the health risks. The same slowness of action when it comes to health in our cities plagued the 20th and early 21st century, as it took until 2030 for London to get rid of car pollution in our streets. 104 years later, in 2035, Somerstown is celebrating in the vein of Father Basil Jellicoe by burning effigies of cars, the 21st century's vermin for our health. The residents of Somerstown are celebrating the last private car to go through the area. Their streets have been opened up to cycles, scooters and green public transport. School streets, community events, gardening, socialising, play and many more ad hoc neighbourhood activities now have become the norm. The same luxury that was afforded to those slum residents of Somerstown, a home that wouldn't make them sick, has now been afforded to the street. People finally have streets which will not make you sick from car pollution. We now visit Lisa in Ponders End, Enfield, where a new form of urbanism is introduced to change the way we live with water in our cities.
Hi, thank you so much for tuning in. We are now live at Ponders End, a ward that sits very closely to the River Lee. As you can see, today is a really lovely day, which is very rare in London. But what's more interesting about today is that it has been 80 years since the last flood that happened in this area, all thanks to the Lee Flood Relief Channel that was constructed during the 1960s. Although it has been really safe so far, there were many moments that the channel was almost full, which is a really troubling news, because there's a possibility that a major flood, another one, to occur if there is a really extreme weather condition. Therefore, floods can never really be controlled or eliminated. It can only be reduced and minimized.
Traditional flood mitigations like the Lee Channel reflects deeply on how London view its waterways. In this city, water is often a thing that needs to be controlled, contained, and used purely for functional needs. This attitude dates back as early as the Industrial Revolution, where the River Lee was mainly utilized for power, water supply, and moving heavy freights. Instead of a water course that could have been a front gate, was turned into a neglected back zone surrounded by industrial grounds, railway lines, and obstructive road networks. For some time, it became an entity that only served the people's needs, never something to be respected and valued on its own. The decline in industries may have paved a new wave of residential waterfront developments. However, they too did not reconnect with the waterways, often designed in a safe distance, never responding to the river. Finally, today in 2030, we are witnessing a new form of building environment that integrates with the River Lee. Instead of containing, ignoring, and fearing the water's presence, the place will be designed to allow water to flow freely into the built space. This intervention is not only to be flood-proof, but is intended to change the way we see water in the city. Here, the residents will live with water harmoniously and experience the unique qualities of water and ecology that brings with it. The aim is to move away from the traditional mindset of control and separation and create a place where nature and built have a more close-knit relationship. In addition to the projects reconnecting people to nature in the city, there have also been some exciting work happening in rural areas. We now head to Suffolk to see the project.
Good afternoon, everybody. You're joining me, Olivia Sutherill, live here in the Countryfile weather studios for this week's Weather Watcher Report. So far this week, we've been experiencing inclement weather across the country with snow and high winds, especially in the east. As we head into the coming week, the weather looks set to remain severe, with high winds continuing to disrupt services. In addition to this, with a slight rise in temperatures this week, the snow many of you have been experiencing is looking set to melt. So for those of you in low-lying areas prone to flooding, we are advising to keep an eye out for potentially flooded roads and debris. This week, for our Weather to Watch Out For segment, we are focusing particularly on the weather forecast predicted for the village of Icon, where a tidal surge is predicted to occur on Sunday morning. As you can see in the footage behind me, sent in by our local weather watcher, Tim Dunstable, the water levels in the Old Estuary are already looking pretty high. The estuary is of course a tidal body of water, and the live image behind me shows what is the current high tide. The next low tide will be at 7:23 this evening, followed by an 8:07 high tide on Sunday morning, which will coincide with the predicted tidal surge. The surge will occur due to high winds forecasted to buffer the coastline of the southeast early on Sunday morning. Those of you by the coast will already be able to feel those winds picking up, and as you can see in the footage of Icon behind me, it's pretty blustery. Residents are likely to be prompted by this to think back on the tidal surge experienced here in 2013, in which the previously crumbling flood defences failed to hold back the deluge of water, and the phenomenon caused devastation to the community and surrounding landscape. Fortunately for the residents of Icon, many of whom live close to the banks of the Old Estuary, the area of salt marsh that you can see behind me that was recently implemented as part of a scheme of managed realignment in the area should absorb most of the energy of the surge. By the time the water reaches the new smaller scale flood defences that have been built closer to the dwellings than before, the force of the water will be minimal, therefore causing no damage to the defences and simply gently overtopping the defences to a small degree. The Met Office has advised that locals are unlikely to be affected by the surge, however should remain alert and, if necessary, seek shelter in the newly constructed Refuge Hub and Visitor Centre. Those of you that are watching who have become interested in this wonderful location of natural beauty and wish to visit, more information is available online and can be accessed via the QR code on the screen behind me. On the website, you can find out more about the recent scheme to realign the boundary of the Old Estuary and access information on organising your trip to the new visitor centre, including tidal timetables, which will help you to plan your visit to the now island church, accessible at low tide via the causeway. That's all from me here at the Weather Department. Now, back to the studio.
Thanks for that, Olivia. We hope to see you all down by Suffolk Cove soon.
We hope you've all enjoyed the array of exciting projects that we have visited today, with many more to come throughout the rest of 2035. That's it for today. Tune in to next week's episode, where we will be at locations in and around the North Sea.